So anyway, Piers Morgan sat down with Zelensky in a wide-ranging interview, but I think one of the moments that stood out to me the most is something that really hasn't, I don't think, got a lot of attention. Certainly hasn't got a lot of attention on CNN or MSNBC or the mainstream media. But one of the things that Zelensky talked about was that Americans must sacrifice more for Ukraine. And we'll get into the details of all of this. But here, let me just play a few minutes of this interview with Piers Morgan asking Zelensky about the United States' role in this and why some people don't want to spend as much money as we've been pouring into Ukraine. Here's his response. Listen.
Some on the Republican side in particular who think that America shouldn't be spending all this money on a war here, which has nothing to do with them. They think there are more important things in America, like inflation and so on, that they should be working on. What is your message to those Americans who do not think America should be as heavily involved?
We are fighting for absolutely communal values that are universally understood. Some time ago, I responded that war doesn't have a distance. And the war in Ukraine is still the war against those values that are professed in the United States and in Europe. The distance doesn't exist today. Today, Russian rockets can fly over a few thousand kilometers. And tomorrow, they will have rockets that can cover tens of thousands of kilometers. What difference does it make? They kill civilians who do not agree with the politics of the president of Russia. So this war, here and now in Ukraine, and forgive me that I'm saying it so cynically, is for the safety of Europe. As long
Oh, okay. So just a few things let's unpack here because I want to play more of this. But first of all, communal values. We're fighting for communal values.
Is that the same communal values we're fighting for in Palestine, with the Israel-Palestine thing?
Depends what community you're asking.
Right. So if it's on the same day we learn from excellent reporter, friend of the show, Eva Bartlett, who just got back from Donetsk, covering, again, continued attacks in that region by the Ukrainian military, right? And now this has finally been reported in the Western media. Finally, the Western media is actually starting to cover this, right? So what communal values? Literally pedal bombs, pedal mines that are being thrown out on the streets that look like little flowers. And so what happens is these little mines that they don't actually kill you. They're not meant to. They're not meant to actually do that. And I spoke to Eva about this. She said, these mines aren't meant to kill you. No, they're just meant to take off a limb. That's it. And so guess who finds these little flowery mines?
Kids. I guarantee it.
So that's the goal, right? That's the goal. I'm getting chills even talking about it. That's the communal values we're talking about. And no one's covering this. And yet we need to, this is where we as a community come together, right? This is what we support. We heard this from Kamala Harris. We heard this from President Biden. It's about saving democracy. We need to spend so much more money, and why Americans need to suffer and sacrifice domestically, because nothing that you are going through in America right now, frankly, Europe too, I mean, had the amount of money, it doesn't really matter just, American century. What you guys are sacrificing right now is nothing compared to what we need. Listen.
we are resisting, the integrity of the United States will continue. Therefore, we are giving our lives for your values and the joint security of the world. Therefore, inflation is nothing. COVID is nothing. Ask those people who lost their children, their peace, their property at the beginning of the full-scale Russian invasion. Who is thinking about masks and COVID? Who is thinking about inflation? These things are secondary. The most important thing is to survive and preserve your life, family, and your country. Therefore, at the moment we are doing this job, but the West has to help us.
Yeah, the West has to help us. Here's an idea how the West could help. Negotiate peace.
Yes.
Force you to the table. And by the way, instead of having Boris Johnson fly in and talk you out of doing such a thing. How do you protect people? You don't, war doesn't get you there, by the way.
I mean, but I want to remind all of us that supporting the conflict raging on means you support people will continue to die, and you don't, with this dream, right, that Ukraine will regain its sovereignty, which will not happen It just does not seem like reality that's possible at this point. So supporting this means that you're okay with this conflict, which will continue to kill young men mostly, actually not even young anymore, on both sides.
Yeah.
Well, and also it's frustrating because Putin said for 8 years what would keep peace, and we ignored it and we did it anyway. And in my opinion, his requests weren't out of line. They were not out of line.
No, one of the requests was, hey, why don't you stop shelling people in eastern Ukraine and killing them? Like, there's been a genocide that's been unfolding there for 8 years that the mainstream media was covering in part, and then they conveniently stopped covering it in February, right? So this was one of the requests. Why don't you stand by the Minsk agreements that you all put in place in 2014? Why don't you stand by them and support them instead of ignoring them and continuing to shell eastern Ukraine? How about that?
I see what he's